Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So nice to see everybody here today, and not live, so I can make bloopers and edit them out. So this is the kind of all the pressure's off, you know. And so had a nice retreat, which I think many people here were at, and it's nice to go on these kind of retreats. I remember when I first started to meditate. I was at a Zen temple, and I kind of Googled Buddhism Toronto, and that was the first thing that came up. And so I went there, and I started to go to their kind of Sunday morning sittings, which they had. And those were a lot like this. All the various meditation programs in English tend to follow this kind of format, something similar to this. And really liked it, and noticed that it was having a beneficial effect on my mind, and so then eventually decided to try my first meditation retreat at this temple. And at this temple they would do meditation retreats for 5 days, and they had one 5-day one in the winter time and one 5-day one in the summertime. And they called these 5-day retreats Youngmin Jungjins. And Youngmin Jungjin in Korean, this was a Korean Zen temple, means, I think it means like fearless practice, something like that. It's based on the Korean monastic tradition. They have winter and they have summer instead of like in South Asia where they basically just have a summer season. So they kind of have 2 periods where the monks don't wander, one in the winter and one in the summer. And then in that tradition, they conduct 3-month retreats, one 3-month retreat in the winter, and one 3-month retreat in the summer. And for the monks, these retreats are really intense. So they usually start quite early in the morning, maybe 3 or 4, and it's all group sittings, usually with 50 minutes of sitting or something, and maybe 10 minutes of walking. And then there's usually 3-hour blocks for those sittings. And then that continues basically all day until 10 at night, and then that stops, and then the monks are to continue practicing on their own. And then I think it starts again, you know, maybe at 3 in the morning the next day. And then this keeps going on, and then it reaches the middle of the retreat. And in the middle of the retreat, they have something very special called Youngmin Jungjin, which is where the monks extend their sitting periods all day and all night. And so they're no longer allowed to sleep. And so if you fall asleep, somebody comes with this kind of like bamboo clacker and hits you. So they all kind of face inwards, and then the hall has this kind of path around it. And so there's always somebody walking with this path and this stick. They're just walking. And you can feel them kind of when they come. I didn't go on the monastic retreat. I saw the kind of the version. But they kind of walk around behind you. So you don't even know, you can't even see them. You know, like they're coming in front of you, they're behind you. And if they see you asleep, then they'll hit you with the clacker. And it makes a sound like clack, and then you wake up. And so this is called the Youngmin Jungjin, and is what kind of these 5-day retreats were based on. They were called Youngmin Jungjins because they were similar difficulty for people living a lay life, not living a kind of monastic life where you could devote yourself to these things. And they were really kind of fun and beneficial. I remember you'd wake up, usually you'd start at 5, and then you'd have to do this kind of rub down in cold water. So they'd give these buckets of cold water, and you would dunk your cloth in it, and you got the same cloth, you had to use it for the whole retreat, and then you had to use that same bucket to wash it. You kind of had to keep rubbing your, you'd be like a kind of bath with this kind of a cloth. and kind of these cold buckets of water. And then after that, you would go out and run around and do exercise, and then you would meet in the meditation hall for these sittings, kind of these sittings they would usually be for a half hour, and then there'd be a 10-minute break, then there'd be another sitting. And then every 3-hour block, there would be a period of running, and then medium pace, and then the last pace you would do, everybody would walk. And it was all together. You would all kind of have to run as a group, and then slower as a group, and then you'd start walking as a group, and your last walking was back into the meditation hall. And remember it kind of very clearly, because had never kind of had any experience with these retreats, and so had no idea what I was getting myself into. Kind of just went on that retreat. And I had all these kind of ideas about what I was going to do on the retreat. One of them was that if things got too difficult, I would just fall asleep and not tell anybody. And so you'd be sitting, and the first 3 hours is okay, and then the second day you start to feel all this pain. And so then I thought, okay, I'll just fall asleep. Nobody's going to know. I was up at really early anyway. I didn't get much sleep, so time to conk out. And so you conk out, and then you wake up, and the more awake you got, you started to realize the more you felt the pain. Kind of somehow when you weren't that awake, you didn't feel pain as much. When you were more awake, it was even worse. It was kind of like all over. Now your body has all this energy, so it's tense. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I'm not getting enough food to eat. So instead you get this instruction, eat less food, And I'd think, I'm not getting enough food to eat, so I'm going to eat more food. And I'd eat more food, lots more food. And then when I went to sit down, my body was very heavy. And I also had all this extra energy. And because I had all this extra energy, I felt much more pain. My body had a lot more kind of energy to go tense up around the painful areas. So that didn't really work out either. And so I ended up kind of, doing these things where I'd be sitting and trying to, just get through it. And then I would totally lose all my kind of, my resistance to the pain. And so then I'd slump over like this. Or kind of just put my head on the ground. And then the guy who was conducting the retreat would be like, sit up straight. Kind of yell at you. I was the only one doing this, by the way. Everybody else was kind of okay. But I decided going into the retreat that I wouldn't leave it no matter what. I kind of wanted to stay and didn't want to wimp out. And I wanted to keep sitting on the floor. And to this day, that retreat was possibly one of the most physically painful experiences that I'd ever been in. Kind of hard to remember. There was a few times where I've kind of broken bones, and that was painful. But this was this kind of different type of pain because I was fully aware. I wasn't drugged. I was right there. And there was nothing I could do to escape it. I couldn't shift too much. You felt very guilty if you shifted around, I couldn't fall asleep. I couldn't distract myself with food. And so I was just face to face with this pain. And ironically, the only thing that I could do to combat this pain, the only option that I found worked, was to focus on my meditation practice. That was basically the only thing that helped. It's kind of almost nothing else I could do. Any kind of avenue I could find to try to cheat was blocked off. So I was basically left there with just my body in pain and just my mind, having never sat cross-legged on the floor for long periods of time, really, except for those Sunday sittings and the Wednesday ones, maybe since I was in elementary school as a kid. And so the amazing thing about this was that it was effective, learning to focus on my meditation practice. That was something that worked. All the other avenues for my usual ways of distracting myself were blocked off, but still here, I had a kind of capability. I had a kind of option to train my mind, even in the midst of all this pain. I found that you can kind of try to break this kind of concentration on the breath up into very, very small units. And kind of just this second, kind of in this terrible pain, just one more second. Okay, a second's long. Let's break it up into even smaller increments. See how small it can make the increments go. And the amazing thing was that just focusing in on a small increment of time like this, very, very small, then gradually the minutes start to pass by. So long as one keeps doing that. It's kind of small increment of time, more and more focus, more and more focus, more and more focus. And then gradually the mind begins to detach itself from its usual modes of thinking. Kind of like goes above them a bit until all there is kind of focus on this meditation practice. And if you leave your focus on your meditation practice, you're right there with pain. It's right there again. And you can't escape it. So it's basically the only kind of option that I could find. And so I think I said this on the retreat, but the amazing thing was, doing this for many days and then kind of relapsing, losing my energy, and then kind of doing this and going, oh, everybody else is around sitting up straight. They don't look like they're having any problems at all. The day came when maybe by the third or fourth day, I think suddenly my body started feeling very light. Just kind of had no clue where this pain had gone, but suddenly just disappeared and was able to continue sitting. And this kind of terrible fatigue that had been feeling, this terrible fatigue, desire to sleep, kind of, it seemed to kind of balance itself out with the pain. Kind of, there's kind of a nice evenness to feeling some physical pain, but also being tired. Kind of seemed to balance itself out. And so then they'd have these kind of interviews and they'd shake the bell and you'd kind of run in there and you'd be kind of not far from the Zen teacher, maybe right here, and he'd be sitting there. And, at first, the first several days, I would get like a lot of criticism. And then finally, once I started to not shift around for like a few sittings, he said, okay, good, I think you're getting into the spirit of Youngmin Jungjen. And then I remember on the fourth day, the day before it was to end, the night before it was to end, they had these kind of Dharma students. And these Dharma students were people who decided to take on the role of eventually becoming priests at the temple. And they would do these kind of prostrations where they get up and then do a bow and then get up and they kind of stand up and then they do a bow. And they make a practice of doing these bows. And then special occasions they'll do 1,000 of these bows. And so these bows, to do 1,000 bows takes like 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours. And sometimes they'll do 3,000, which takes maybe 7 or 8 hours. And so it was the last day before the retreat was to end. And one of these Dharma students asked me he's like, we're going to do some bowing. Do you want to join us? And I said, okay, So kind of went in and joined them. And it was kind of 3 hours of this bowing, which was like 1,000 bows, and was surprised that was able to do that because the beginning of the retreat was so terrible. And then the last day of the retreat came, and this usually it's the morning and then the afternoon, and then right before lunch, then the whole thing ends with a long chanting session. And remember that was able to sit through that. And so learned a kind of a very valuable lesson from that retreat, which was number one thing that this is what he would often repeat on these retreats. He's like, you're capable of a lot more than you think you're capable of. He would say that often and kind of go in there and be like, the pain. And he would be like, you're capable of more than you think. You're capable of doing more than you think you can do. And this is a lesson that I felt was driven home on that particular retreat, because in day one there was this terrible excruciating pain, and the usual tendency is to take a present moment experience and extend it indefinitely into the future. Yeah? Okay, this pain is building, it's going to continue to build. That's the immediate thought that occurs in the mind with something like that. But this actually ended up being totally false. Actually, the pain didn't continue to build, it disappeared till I didn't even know where it was. Yeah? Kind of another thought is, this is impossible for me to do. How can I, use my meditation practice to overcome this, And yet it wasn't impossible. There it was, actually, the meditation practice was actually the only escape from these things. And then these thoughts like, these sittings are lasting forever, it's never going to change. That also turned out to be false. At a certain point, they start to kind of flow together and everything seems to pick up momentum. And so right there was a kind of very visceral lesson that a lot of the time, the difficulties that one might face in one's life, they have these same kind of elements to them. It's kind of element where there's a present moment difficulty and one takes it and extends it infinitely into the future. It's kind of this difficulty will always be this way. And then when one tries to overcome that difficulty using various means, one tries one thing, it doesn't work. Tries eating more food, doesn't work. Try sleeping more, it doesn't work. Then the tendency is to think there's no solution. It's impossible to overcome this difficulty, whatever the difficulty is. And yet there is a solution. The solution is there. And one finally stumbles on a course of action that doesn't seem to end and, just roadblock one, the immediate thought can be, well, this isn't enough. It's not enough to do it. It's not possible for me to do it. And yet it is possible. This kind of thing is there. So it's amazing that these things, these kind of problems, they tend to graph in this way a lot of the time. The problems that arise in the microcosm, in the small scale in one's mind on a retreat, these are the same patterns that occur in the larger scale in one's life. This kind of thought, I can't do this. This thought, trying various avenues and it's not working, things are getting blocked off. Then noticing something that seems to work a little bit and the immediate thought is it's not enough. It's not enough to do. So the nice thing about the Buddha's teachings, about the practice of meditation, when we learn to keep going with our practice, we have these experiences, we stop believing these kind of thoughts like it's not enough. Like this is something that I can't do. Wait a minute, I've done something like this. What do you mean it's not enough? It is enough. I can make this grow, So what we learn to think is that instead of believing everything our mind tells us about what we're capable of, we stop believing it. We start to trust the Dhamma more than we trust our thoughts. We start to trust the Dhamma more than we trust our perceptions. And this is something that comes about through practice. Through using the techniques the Buddha teaches us to try to overcome the problems that arise in our life, especially the mental defilements, the things that cause us to make our mind dark, especially these problems that arise from greed, the problems that arise from hatred, the problems that arise from delusion. And learning to practice with these things, no matter how intractable they come, they all have a solution to them. This is the amazing thing about the Dhamma. There's actually no problem. When you think about it, there's a way to solve suffering. There's no problem in one's mind, in one's practice, that can withstand the power of what they call sati and panya. It's kind of mindfulness and wisdom. And there's this thing where we keep trying, and the day comes when the whole thing falls apart. One doesn't even know where the problem was in the first place. One can't even find it. So when that happens, one can gain a lot of faith in the practice that the Buddha set out. One can gain a lot of faith in the practice of meditation and its ability to overcome these various negative mental states. And one can gain a lot of faith in oneself. A lot of faith that we're more than we're capable, that there's more that one can do than one thinks. That one is capable of doing a lot more than one thinks. Of overcoming a lot more than one thinks that one can overcome. And all of it comes about through this development. The development of the mind through sati, through panya, through meditation, through advancing on the Buddha's path, and through seeing these things oneself. One gains a lot of faith in the Dhamma. It's kind of faith that this is the right way to go. That this is a path that starts in happiness, has happiness in the middle, and ends in a happiness that doesn't change.